Hello everybody, Eternal Flame here, and today we are back with the Full Potential series. Yeah, that's right, we are back today to do the Full Potential series, where today we are going to try and advance the entirety of Kyoto High in order to not make them absolute garbage so they aren't going to be memed on. We are just going to mainly be talking about the combatants today, so we are actually doing this a different approach than how I normally do it. The normal way I do my Full Potential series is we specifically target the technique and not actually the person, and we focus on creating the best user of the technique as possible. I don't feel like doing that today because I want to be nice to Kyoto High. Rather than creating a better user of the technique so we can see how good the technique would be and just how trash them we are as people, I want to try improving themselves as sorcerers in order to make the technique as best as possible. However, there's going to be something else special about this video that's going to be very different from how I usually do these types of videos, which is the other sorcerers are going to be allowed to help each other. This is going to impact some sorcerers dramatically, while others are just going to get more minor impacts, but all of them are going to get impacts, which are going to make a lot of sense the more and more I get into this video. Basically, if you want an in-lore explanation, Utahime felt like their performance back during the Goodwill Festival was embarrassing, and also just consider this a timeline where Mekamaru got away to tell Gojo, and Gojo was able to arrive on time before Mahito and Kinjaku could kill him, and those two are dead, so basically the Koen Games never happened in this timeline. Now, the order I'm planning to cover these sorcerers are going to go as followed. First, I'm going to go with Miwa, then Momo, then Kamo, then Todo, then Mai, then Mekamaru, and then finally I'm going to go into how teamwork affects all of this and how it's going to help advancing all of them. There are also going to be chapters in the video if you want to skip over certain characters. However, let's get started. Now up first is Miwa, and I'm not going to waste too much time on Miwa, mainly because we already know what a full potential Miwa should be, and that's literally just Kusakabe. In other words, we just need to make Miwa into a Kusakabe while keeping a good mentality rather than having Kusakabe's mentality, and you get a pretty good sorcerer. The main reason why I think keeping a good mentality is important is mainly because of the fact that Kusakabe has a lot of self-doubt about himself, and he just doesn't think of himself as that strong. So yeah, just have Miwa become Kusakabe. Now this will be very, very hard to achieve, but if you are able to pay Ui and Mei enough, which I think should be possible considering the combined funds of Mekamaru and Mekamaru's ability to hack, as well as Kamo and his resources should be able to find a way to pay Mei enough. And because we already know where Kusakabe is, this would put Miwa at grade 1 level if she can achieve the level of Kusakabe. Of course, it's not entirely sure if she can or not, but if she does somehow manage to achieve it, that would be her full potential, which for the sake of this video, we are assuming that she can achieve it, mainly because we're being generous to Kyoto High. Now up next for Momo, what should we have Momo work on in order to advance her abilities? Well, number one, let's go over what her actual curse technique is, because I'm pretty sure a bunch of people did forget what her curse technique was. Even I forgot, and I actually had to Google it before this video. Her technique allows her to telepathically control items. She mainly uses it to control a broom. She has also been shown the ability to carry other people on her broom as well, and she can carry her own weight on the broom and continue to use that to fly. Finally, she's also capable of launching out wind slashes and wind gusts out from her broom. It is also somewhat implied that Momo has to take on the weight of the objects herself, however that's not fully certain yet. So how would we improve Momo? Well, first I think it's pretty obvious that we're going to need to improve the amount of curse energy they have, their refinement, as well as their ability to carry things. The easiest way to help with their refinement is to get them to land a Black Flash. Of course, nobody can land a Black Flash at will, but trying to train to at least be able to unlock the Black Flash ability is still going to help nonetheless. With that being said, I doubt that Momo is actually going to be able to land the Black Flash, if I'm going to be honest. However, them improving on their physical capabilities as well as their curse energy will be essential. Now up next, we're going to alter the tools that Momo carries with her, mainly because, as you guys can tell, just carrying around a broom that you fly on is not good for combat. Now yes, I do know Momo's entire main purpose is just being surveillance and helping people out in order to make sure that they are aware of what situation they're going to get into, but it would be better for Momo to have more things in order for her to serve as better support. Now, we don't know for sure if Momo is able to manipulate several items, however, I am going to say that she is, mainly because we've already seen people who are capable of manipulating several items and sending them on different paths. So look at Kamo Noritoshi, who's able to send several arrows in different directions, for example. Now, of course, I don't think Momo can manipulate tens or even hundreds of objects at once, but even a few objects is going to help her severely in comparison to just having one object, which is a broom. For example, you could have Momo carrying around several stones in order to manipulate that and launch out more attacks at opponents. That would also be able to launch out more wind sives out from each of the stones. Like, imagine Momo just having a large amount of stones floating up in the air and they all are launching wind sives at an opponent. You could also do this potentially with arrows, or you could do this with blades. You can do this with a bunch of weapons in order to give Momo a lot more versatility and just constantly bombard opponents with attacks from the air and from close range as well. You also could go full Gremmy and give Momo a bunch of guns going guns ablazing and manipulating them through tool manipulation to fire. Rather than just them having one gun, you can have several guns. You also have the advantage of the fact that bullets are pretty effective against sorcerers, mainly because of the fact that they don't have curse energy infused into them. Now, it won't be really good against people that are high level, like grade 1s and above, but it will still be very useful against sorcerers and curses. Of course, for curses, you need to infuse curse energy into the bullets, but nonetheless, it would still be pretty effective. However, we're not done yet. This is when we're going to get into a specific set of tools and a binding vow that I have in mind for Momo, where for Momo I want her to start infusing curse energy into several arrows. However, these arrows have a very unique purpose, as these arrows are not mainly made to be used in combat other than for one-time move things, as it's going to have a very similar binding vow to the binding vow Mei has placed on her crows, where once these arrows land on an opponent, they will immediately get destroyed in order to get a massive buff to their power when they land on somebody. This is all mainly to help with Momo's battle power and making her that much more effective of a combatant. Now yes, she could add cursed tools to her arsenal, but I legit don't know if she actually could afford to get the cursed tools that would actually be good. Like, they could get pre-made cursed tools, but I don't think she could afford to get any that is actually worthwhile. I think with all of this we can get Momo to the pretty high tiers of semi-grade 1. I don't think that she's going to surpass semi-grade 1, mainly because there are limits to what she can really do, but I do think we can get her all the way up to semi-grade 1. However, that's not too bad considering Momo's main purpose is literally to be support. Now up next is Kamo Noritoshi, and this is going to be one of the shorter sections of the video. Not because I don't have a lot to talk about with blood manipulation, but that's because I have kind of already made 2 videos going over the full potential of blood manipulation. One going over what a blood manipulation domain would be like, and another going over what the full potential of blood manipulation would be like in the very specific context of a human using it and not death painting using it. So I'm going to just go over a very quick summary of everything that I said in that video, but I'm also going to include something else, which is an idea I got from you guys in the comments because one of you people are just straight up a monster. You know who you are when I get to your idea. However, if you want a more detailed explanation on the ability itself, go check out the original video of what is the full potential of blood manipulation. So of course, starting out, we need to get Kamo access to reverse curse technique. While it won't be as good as converting your own curse energy into blood, you'll need to use RCT instead. It'll be better than Kamo dying out from blood loss. Up next, instead of carrying blood bags around, Kamo is going to end up creating several Shikigami in order to store his blood in. Basically consider this Kamo taking inspiration after fighting Megumi and deciding, you know what, Megumi has these Shikigami, I'm gonna try and make my own Shikigami since they are clearly so useful for him, and it's what gave him the advantage in our fight. This also ends up helping to counter one of the main weaknesses of blood manipulation, being its weakness to water, mainly because if it's stuck inside of a Shikigami, water won't be able to touch it as easily. Then use the Shikigami as shells in order to prepare techniques inside of the Shikigami. Also a reminder, because a lot of people don't know this, it is possible for anybody to create a Shikigami. Gojo stated that a while back to Yuji, back when Yuji was figuring out about curse energy. Sure, it's simple Shikigami, but Kamo has access to a curse technique, which is going to make them that much better. And I have a couple Shikigami ideas in mind. One Shikigami is going to be just a pretty large Shikigami that's only purpose is going to be carrying blood for Kamo to use. Another Shikigami is going to have piercing blood infused into it where it can only fire out piercing bloods, which I imagine basically being a dragonfly. And because of that, it's going to have a binding vow on top of it, which is going to end up amping the piercing blood since that's the only technique it can use. And then a final Shikigami in the background, which main purpose is going to be charging up very powerful attacks, while Kamo as well as his Dragonfly Shikigami continue to fight and put pressure on the main opponent from the front. For Kamo's technique of slicing exorcism, we're going to advance it by taking advantage of Choso's usage of it, where it's also just going to be thin lines of blood to slice at people while at the same time still using the entire shuriken that Kamo makes, mainly because both applications are pretty good to use. Furthermore, you can also include occasional binding vows in order to make piercing blood that much stronger by amping up the amount of time it needs to charge up, because it does need some time to charge in order to compress the blood to be fired out properly. Up next is Flowing Red Scale Stack, where the way that I would amp up Flowing Red Scale and Flowing Red Scale Stack is by amping up the property that allows them to heat up their body. I wouldn't constantly heat up their body, but I would make it so Kamo for moments of time massively heats up their body in order to do burning damage as well on top of the physical damage that they do whenever they touch opponents. We see that Kamo was able to amp up the heat of their body because that's how Choso was able to melt through Arame's ice. Now, of course, it's going to have high risk as a technique, but that's just going to make the technique that much better because we can turn that into binding vows. Now, of course, there is the possibility that Kamo might have access to the ability to manipulate blood in other people, but I don't think that's too likely. I think they have to be dead people at best, assuming he can even manipulate blood in other people, but I think it is potentially possible. However, what I think is even more interesting is the domain expansion we are going to give Kamo, as I think if any character is going to be fitting of having a domain expansion, it's going to be one of the inheritors of the big three families, being Kamo himself. And I think one of the most fitting domain expansions for Kamo Noritoshi to have access to is a sure hit that allows him to manipulate the blood in other people and force them to stand still, basically on a full-on Katara type beat from Avatar. and then start to go crazy on them with techniques. However, now I'm going to go into one of the techniques that you guys came up with because y'all are downright monsters, and the technique that you guys came up with was for Kamo to go to the hospital and find infected blood. Mainly because if Kamo can find infected or diseased blood and use that as attacks, that's just going to make Kamo that much more dangerous and that much more of a menace for most people to fight, mainly because 90% of the verse can't heal poisons. I want y'all to remember, poisons are considered a higher level of RCT than the standard level of RCT. Ultimately, at the end, I would consider this Kamo to be on par with Choso. The domain expansion would put him a tier above Choso, so he should likely be in the high-end grade 1 terms of tier, and that would also be his ranking because I don't see him soloing a nation, but he's still going to be insanely strong nonetheless. However, if the two were to fight, unfortunately, I still see Choso ultimately winning, mainly because Kamo shouldn't have immunity to Choso's poison, while at the same time, Choso should be fine against Kamo's poison that he is going to have access to through his blood. Of course, that is excluding the possibility of Kamo using his domain. If Kamo were to use his domain, I do think he'd win. Also, before we go over to Todo, if you like full potential videos like this, we got a lot more on the channel, and it would help a lot if you just click that little subscribe button down below. Anyways, we're gonna get into Todo now. Aoi Todo, the man with over 500,000 IQ, an absolute genius who already uses his curse technique extremely well. However, there are probably some ways we can advance his curse technique. Unlike the others, we don't really need to advance Todo's physical stats, mainly because Todo is already at a really good position in terms of physicals. Like, at most, all we need to do is teach Todo RCT, and that will significantly help Todo, but other than that, he is really good in terms of combat as a physical combatant. However, now we're going to focus on Todo's technique and how to make Todo's technique significantly better. Up first, we're going to get some inspiration from a Naruto character known as Minato, where we're going to have Todo start to carry around a bunch of objects to swap around with him. Now, I'm not going to say kunai, but I am going to say either rocks in order to make it so they're easier to displace, that just have a bunch of curse energy infused into them, rather than him having to pick up random things on the road, or it could just be things like daggers in order to teleport people into them. One of the biggest issues that exist with Aoi Todo is the fact that he doesn't really have much to swap with in normal fights, depending on who he's fighting against. So if Todo can carry around a bunch of things to swap with, this will end up significantly helping him, mainly because it will become much harder to predict him. Furthermore, it can also end up painting the image that he can only swap with those things that he brought in people's curse energy and not people's attacks. This also will be significant to help with the other thing that we're going to grant Todo, which is the Vibra Slap. We're just going to say that Todo's going to infuse curse energy and basically make the Vibra Slap as part of himself by duct taping it to his hand. And some of you guys might be wondering, why would that work? And I'm just saying, if Todo can attach the Vibra Slap to the nub on his hand, and that be counted as his hand, then he can duct tape it to his hand and still be counted as his hand. This also makes Todo having a bunch of items that he carries around with him to swap with that much more significant, because he will have the Vibra Slap that allows him to do 50 swaps per second, and now he can just throw around a bunch of items and make it look like he is disappearing. In a similar tactic to what he did with Yuji to make it look like Yuji had a bunch of shadow clones, he can do that himself now with a bunch of random items that he carries around with him that is cursed energy infused into it. You can even have Todo carry around swords and throw the swords up into the air and jump at one of them before clapping, causing someone else to get impaled through a sword. Like, the more items that Todo carries around with him, the better, because Todo can become straight up devious if he teleports people into those items. We also know this is very in character for Todo to do, considering Todo literally clapped and made Hanami swap places with him and get impaled by their own attack. Now, I'm not going to give Todo a domain expansion, mainly because I have absolutely no idea what Todo's domain expansion would even do and how to make that work. However, I do have a way that might actually make Todo's technique significantly more broken. However, I'm not fully sure if this is actually possible. Now, up first, I do want to establish that the power of the person Todo is swapping with does not matter at all. After all, there are people Todo has swapped with that are significantly stronger than him, mainly because we know Todo is capable of swapping with Sukuna, whose Sukuna is much more powerful than Todo. So that is something very important to establish with what I'm about to say. Now, you might be wondering, how am I going to make Todo's technique so much more broken? And it's quite simple, really. Todo has to target curse energy that he swaps with. Why not just target only half of the curse energy that he can sense rather than the full thing? So basically, here's my thing that I want to suggest. Have Todo, instead of clapping and swapping the full object, have him only clap and swap places with like half of a person. This would have the capability of one-shotting most people. Now, I do think this would have a power requirement to it, mainly because it is forcefully separating parts of the body from another person just off their curse energy alone, so Todo would probably have to be stronger than them, but at the same time, I'm not too sure, mainly because of the world's cutting slash. Because all the world cutting slash is doing is just targeting something else, which is targeting everything in existence, and that's why it's able to cut through gojo. So I believe you could make an argument that this application of Todo's technique would just follow under that same line. Of course, if you don't think it's possible, or if you think that it would require a power argument to it, then I'm fine with that. But at the same time, we are going over what the full potential of Todo could be. So ultimately, this Todo would be much stronger than his canon counterpart because he carries around a bunch of things to swap with, and if this application ends up being true, then Todo is easily special grade level, mainly because if he can do this to 50 times a second to random people, he is taking over a nation no problem, but that only depends on if this technique and version of the technique is even possible, which I'm kind of not certain about. So if it is possible, Todo is certainly on the special grade rank, but if it's not possible, Todo is probably just a bit stronger than he is in canon. Now, I do admit I wish I could have made this section longer, but Todo is one of the few people who really use their technique to their pinnacle, so it's really hard to think on better ways to use Todo's technique that Todo hasn't already thought of himself. Now, up next is going to be my Zenin, who actually is the main reason why I'm even making this video to begin with, because this part of the video is sponsored by someone else's super chat who donated $5 for me to specifically talk about my Zenin and her full potential, so we are going to go crazy with how far we can pull Mai. Now, up first, I do need to establish this. Yorozu is not Mai's full potential. While Yorozu might be the full potential in terms of physicality, output, all that good jazz, that's what they are the full potential in. They are not the full potential in terms of creation abilities and what they can create, as because of one thing needs to be established, the difference between Mai and Yorozu, which is the eras they were born in. Now, the main reason why I believe the eras they're born in is so important is because of one tool that Mai has access to that is stronger than any tool Yorozu has access to that is going to really help her creation ability. And that tool is the internet. Now, some of you guys might think I'm memeing right now, but I'm really not, because I want y'all to remember something. Yorozu's from over 1,000 years ago. They did not have the internet, they did not have catalogs of information like they do now, and basically all the information that Yorozu used in order to make her bug armor, I guarantee you Mai can just Google in like an hour, 2 hours, and she'd get it done. The main reason why I think this is so important to establish is because Yorozu had much more limited amount of information, and she still managed to get incredibly far, down to the point where several people consider her top 10. So, we're now giving someone who has much more access to information than Yorozu does a much bigger kit because they have easier access to information. So I hope y'all understand why I'm saying Yorozu's creation abilities that she has shown off is not the peak of the verse or anywhere close to that. Mai could potentially go much greater than Yorozu, and I'm going to explain how this is going to affect her entire capabilities. Now, there is also something else that needs to be important as well. The reason why Maki could not get stronger at all was because Mai did not want to get stronger. She never trained. In this, we're altering Mai's mentality a bit to make her need to train more. Basically, we're just going to change Mai's mentality because while she doesn't want to be involved in the life of a Jujutsu sorcerer, she is aware of cursed spirits, and the best way for her to have a normal life is for her to get strong enough to actually earn that normal life. This also ends up accidentally helping Maki, funnily enough, but that's not important. The main thing that is important for this is the fact that Mai is not going to be limited in her training because Maki also is going to not be limited in her training as well because Maki is going to keep training. And now there is something else important to note, which is the limitations that Mai herself said that she was only capable of. She can't make objects that are too big, and she can't make complex things. Now, I think both of these limits are more so limits on the fact that Mai never trained, and that was all she could make on her final death or her current skill allowed her to make. Mainly because she never trained seriously, which is what we're going to change in this in order to make her have wider reserves of curse energy to make her that much stronger. However, up first we are going to apply something we learned from Yorozu to Mai Zenin. Yorozu is capable of creating an armor that carries several traits from bugs and applies them to a human body. The reason why she mainly targeted insects was because of how energy efficient insects actually are, so she decided to copy several traits from insects from the fact that several insects exist that are able to carry several hundreds of their own strength, 2 insects capable of flying over seas in a few goes, 2 several insects that would fly much faster than their body would look like they're capable of flying. And then after taking the systems from insects, she directly applies it to an armor that amplifies her human traits to have those same functions. Which we are going to take advantage of, starting with an insect that I find very interesting, known as the diabolical ironclad beetle. And that is mainly to help with her durability. This is mainly because the ironclad beetle is capable of taking 39,000 times its average body weight. So if we put that on Mai Zenin and enhance that with curse energy to make it even more powerful, then yeah, you're going to get something that's incredibly durable and very hard to break through as an armor set. After that, in order to help with Mai's speed, we're going to give Mai the power of the Australian tiger beetle and add that to her armor set that she's going to craft. And for those of you wondering why we're going to give her this instead of something like a cheetah, for example, the Australian tiger beetle is capable of moving 171 times its body length per second. Now, some of you guys might be thinking that these bug insect traits shouldn't apply to Mai because Mai is the size of a human. Normally, I would agree with you if it wasn't for the fact that this is literally how Yorozu's armor works. Yorozu's armor applies the bug insect traits to herself in order to amplify her strength, speed, and durability by that same amount that bugs do it to themselves. And now we're going to do that with Mai Zenin. However, like I said, Mai has the advantage of being able to get this information near immediately. Like, googling these two insects took me a couple minutes in order to do that, in order to add that to Mai's armor set, and there is still much more we can do with that because she's going to apply a lot more insect traits to her armor that she's going to craft. For example, we're going to give Mai Zenin access to Spider Silk as well, which Spider Silk is 5 times the tensile strength as steel, which is going to be much more useful for someone of Mai Zenin's size because Mai is a human in terms of size. So now we're going to give her that as attacks and ways to hold people down. Also, we're going to go full Spider-Man and give Mai Zenin the ability to climb walls and stick to walls as well. Speaking on the topic of spiders though, we're going to also give her access to the venom of the brown recluse spider, which is by far and away one of the most toxic, dangerous venoms that currently exist. I know there are other dangerous venoms, but this is just the immediate one that I can find, and its venom is so deadly that it's going to require immediate attention at least sometimes, which of course for some sorcerers, considering most of them can't actually heal poisons, is going to be very deadly, especially because Mai can heavily increase the size of the venom as well. However, who's to say we need to stop at insects, because there are a lot more deadly things that exist in the world that if Mai can figure out how to recreate the systems and add to her armor, it will make them that much more deadly. For example, you can add the poison from the Deathstalker as well, one of the most deadliest scorpions that exist in the world with one of the most deadliest venoms. Now, I'm not going to go across every single animal that I really want to add, mainly because I know I can't find them all, which is why I want to see what you guys think in the comment section down below on what we can add to this armor to make it more and more broken, because that is the thing I want to push home. With Mai Zenin and the creation technique, the sky is the limit. Whatever you can find can potentially be created with enough time. Now, yes, she says that her limit is that she can only create simple things, but at the same time, based on everything we see, it's more so a skill limit because of Yorozu rather than it actually being just an outright limit on her technique and what it is capable of. Which is also supported by the narrator text as well, saying that it's more so Mai Zenin not having a lot of curse energy rather than it actually being a problem on terms of her actual ability to create. Furthermore, we can also copy Yorozu's liquid metal plan, however we can go a step further with that. Why not create liquid metal that is coated in poison so that whenever you touch the liquid metal, it ends up poisoning you? If that's too much for you, you can also just create poisonous gas or several types of gases that most sorcerers aren't going to be prepared to fight. After all, most sorcerers, like I have repeated in this video several times over, do not have an immunity to poison. That is a high level of RCT that most sorcerers just don't have access to. While it's more useful against sorcerers than curses, it's still going to be rather useful against them too. However, even now, we're not even going as far as we possibly can. So let's step into the realm of science and technology for a minute, allowing Mai to push herself even further. Now, this definitely would take a lot of time, but I do think it is possible with time. And if we do that, what's to stop Mai Zenin from becoming a full-on war machine and adding that to her arsenal? Imagine herself giving herself jet boosters in order to help what's already going to be an amazing level of speed that she is going to have access to, or grenade launchers or bullets directly created on the armor itself. Or even giving her heat-seeking missiles, making some weird combination of bug armor fused in with several of a man's greatest technology, a fusion of nature and man, making this perfect weapon for Mai to have access to. And the craziest part about all of this is it wouldn't disappear upon being created because of how Mai's technique works. When something is created, it doesn't disappear, so it would just take time and effort to add all of this together to eventually create the perfect weapon for her to use. Now, this does result in probably a bunch of prototypes being made as well, however that's going to be important for the teamwork section of this, so we're going to leave that there, but keep that in mind, there are going to be a bunch of prototypes too. However, mainly because they're not going to be working alone, I also can see Mai having an easier time working with this because they're going to have access to the genius that is Mechamaru. And now I'm going to attempt to push Mai's technique even further into the limits beyond what I've already done. And this is going to be probably the craziest thing I'm going to do for Mai Zenin, but I want y'all to remember something about Yorozu. Yorozu, upon being pushed heavily enough to do so, was capable of creating an impossible concept, that being a perfect sphere, because perfect spheres just straight up don't make sense and wouldn't work in real life. So what if Mai figured out how to recreate the process of making nukes? Now, of course, I don't think she would ever actually use this ability. However, what if she just had in her arsenal the ability to recreate nukes? Which I do think is something possible with enough time and studying for her to figure out how to recreate a nuke. It would definitely take a lot of time, but I do think she could eventually figure it out. However, that's going to be the end of where I'm going to reach for Mai and Mai's full potential. However, unlike most characters where I'm pretty confident I have thought of a lot of ways to push them, I think I've only scratched the barrel of what's capable of Mai's technique, mainly because Mai has one of the most broken techniques in all of Jujutsu Kaisen. With enough information, enough curse energy control, and enough studying, it can really be pushed to its limits. But it is definitely a cursing that is only going to get stronger and stronger the more and more time that passes, mainly because with more and more time we're just going to discover more and more things to make it even more insane, which is why I only scratched the surface of this, if that. However, ultimately at the end of this, I do think Mai would be given the rank of special grade, mainly because I think y'all can tell just based on the amount we have given Mai and those destructive abilities, if she has access to all of this, yeah, no country is standing a chance against her. And now we're going to move on to Mechamaru. Now Mechamaru is also going to have a rather short section, not because I don't have a lot of ideas for Mechamaru, but a bunch of the ideas I already have for Mechamaru were already done in one of Broken Ronin's video of the full potential of Mechamaru where he did it, and I don't really want to copy all of the ideas that he made, so I'm just going to link you guys his video rather than regurgitating his ideas. However, to summarize those very quickly, one idea he had was basically for him to turn into Iron Man and wear one of the Mechamaru suits as his own, while fighting alongside his own Mechamaru suits. He would also end up carrying several Mechamarus that are just the normal Mechamarus with no special abilities, as well as several of the normal Mechamarus that carry the actual special abilities that they have access to normally. Finally, they would also wield the Ultimate Mechamaru suit. However, there's something that I think you can do even more for Mechamaru, which is instead of going bigger, you can go smaller. And what I mean by that is quite simple. Imagine tens to hundreds of Mechamarus that are really small, like the size of insects that are each carrying small little bombs or small little lasers, and you have them fly at opponents in order to make them explode. Sure, the damage isn't going to be major, but enough of these are going to end up overwhelming people. On that note, I also ended up getting some inspiration from Helldivers and the Hulk units from the Automatons, and we're just effectively going to give Mechamaru a couple of those. Mainly because I think they would be really good tanky support for whoever is fighting alongside Mechamaru. Mechamaru would end up being a really good support type sorcerer. Now I do also think at the end of this Mechamaru would more than likely end up being special grade as well. This is mainly because Mechamaru pretty easily can take over a country, mainly because he can make an army himself, and if Geto can be counted as special grade because he can make an army by absorbing enough cursed spirits, Mechamaru can be counted as special grade for that same reason. There are also some other drone ideas I have in mind as well. For example, normal Mechamarus who carry bombs inside of them that just fly at opponents and explode, and those types of Mechamarus, a bunch of Mechamarus just carrying other standard weapons rather than having curse energy infused weapons, which is mainly to be used against other sorcerers rather than curses. However, you could still infuse a little bit of curse energy into them in order to make them suitable against curses and actually able to properly put them down, because we know you can imbue items with curse energy. However, that's all the ideas I have for Mechamaru, at least Mechamaru on his own. However, this is where we're going to enter into the teamwork section and why teamwork is so important for Kyoto High in particular. Up first, I'm going to talk about the first work of teamwork I foreshadowed a little bit, which is going to be between Mechamaru and Mai Zenin. Now, I want you to remember something I said about Mai's armor, which is the fact that Mai's armor is going to have a lot of prototypes and backup husks. Well, those husks aren't going to be standing around being wasted and doing nothing. No, they're going to be given to Mechamaru in order for Mechamaru to create his own drones. Now, I want y'all to imagine this. Mai Zenin's armor that she had created custom with that much amount of power being aided by Mechamaru's science genius and being controlled by Mechamaru. Or to put it even better, a better version of Yorozu's armor being controlled by Mechamaru with the curse energy cannons being added into that as well. This would probably just become the main Mechamaru body as well once Mechamaru figures out how to fit in his electronics like an animatronic from Five Nights at Freddy's, but once he does, oh boy, this is going to become a monster to fight against, and there are likely going to be several of these things lying around that Mechamaru can upgrade and have fun with. Also, if you think Mai creating her own guns and adding that to the suit was too much, then Mechamaru can just create the guns and add it to the suit for her instead. Now, it wouldn't allow her to create it on the spot, but it would still be pretty useful for her to have, as that would allow her to skip that step. Up next for the teamwork section of things, we're going to go with Mechamaru and Todo. Mechamaru can very easily create several bombs for Todo to carry around with him, so when he claps he can swap places with the bombs and make somebody instantly get hit by the bombs. If we assume that Mai is also capable of creating bombs, then she can do the exact same thing, making Todo's swaps that much more deadly, especially because they have curse energy infused into them and cause shrapnel that will allow much more things for Todo to swap with as well. Mechamaru can also create suits for all people in Kyoto High in order to amp up their physical stats and abilities more. Now, of course, for some of these people, it will be a much more minor buff in comparison for others, like me will be a major buff, but Todo, it would be a minor buff. However, it would still be a buff nonetheless and still be pretty helpful. This is especially the case for Momo, considering Momo's still going to be the weakest one of this entire team, so her having as much of a buff from Mechamaru's armor just being around her will significantly help her. Furthermore, they could also make it so Mechamaru's armor allows her to fly, rather than her needing to use a broomstick, which will allow her to conserve some of her curse energy and direct it mainly to fighting. Furthermore, you could also potentially give Momo some canisters that are containing either Simple Domain or several Ultimate Mechamaru cannons that would be able to be fired from the heavens as support from Momo directly. Mechamaru could also potentially end up creating lightning gauntlets for Kamo. As a result of that, it would allow him to send lightning through his blood, doing shock damage on top of that because blood is an amazing conductor. Now, while there are definitely other team ways of fighting that I can think of, this is mainly the main things that I can think of in order to help each other's kits individually just from extra items from support. However, the most interesting thing I want to say now is where I think I would rank each of these people based on their no full potential states from weakest to strongest. And the order would go Momo at the weakest, then Miwa is up next, after that would be Kamo no Oritoshi, after Kamo would be Mechamaru, then after Mechamaru would be a tie between Mai and Todo. Now, if you do think Todo is capable of swapping only half of a person rather than the full person, Todo would be above Mai. However, if you don't think that is the case, I would put Todo below Mechamaru. But still, I think we did pretty well, considering we were able to upgrade 3 of the people to special grades, and the others to really high-end grade 1s other than Momo, who's a semi-grade 1, but we still did pretty well. So we're going to cover all the characters from Jujutsu High and amp them up to their full potential, as well as have an end section of this video where we're going to go over how they can end up helping each other. Now, for this specific video, we're not going to change anything about Maki, mainly because all I can really say for Maki is just make her physically stronger and give her more curse tools, which is going to be saved more so for the teamwork section rather than just Maki alone, so yeah. However, in place of Maki, we're going to add Junpei to Jujutsu High, as I really want to do a full potential of Junpei type video, so might as well add him into Jujutsu High, mainly because that's where his full potential would really shine. Finally, I will also be including Hakari and Kirara in this as well, mainly because even though they're expelled, I think they still should be counted as Tokyo High. After all, they are Gojo students. So without further ado, let's get straight into this, starting out with Inumaki. Now, unfortunately, there isn't really much that can be done for Inumaki. Like, the best things that we can really do is work on his base form, work on making him physically stronger, give him things like Simple Domain, as well as RCT so he can handle using his curse technique better. But the thing is, Inumaki's curse technique doesn't really have that many ways to improve it, at least in Inumaki's case, mainly because Inumaki is already a really good user of the technique. Like, we can add more words to Inumaki's dictionary, but it's not really going to alter the technique itself, so there aren't really that many ways we can use it. However, this would ultimately result in Inumaki, in my opinion, at least being a grade 1 ranked sorcerer, or grade 1 in terms of level. However, I could see a very easy argument that he would actually qualify as a special grade sorcerer in terms of rank and not actual level. Mainly because with enough time in RCT, if he were to use his curse technique, he would be able to overthrow a nation eventually. And I'm just saying, if Geto can be counted as special grade because he can collect an army of cursed spirits, this same logic should be able to apply for Inumaki as well. So I would put Inumaki's combat level around the level of a grade 1 sorcerer, probably like the mid-end, somewhere like Nanami level. However, I would put his actual level as a rank itself as special grade, because in my opinion, he does have the special grade potential to take over a nation if he has access to RCT. And the stuffed animal is in the same boat, because there's not really much you can do for that thing. So yeah, Pandas remains the same level of strength, maybe add Simple Domain to him, maybe, I don't know. So yeah, that's the end of that. And now we're going to get into Junpei and how I would advance Junpei. Unfortunately, there is not much that we actually know about Junpei's technique and how it works. All we do know is he's able to produce a jellyfish-like Shikigami that can produce a poison that is effective on normal people. However, it doesn't really seem potent enough to kill normal people, but at the same time, it should also be noted Junpei literally just awoke in the technique, so it might have even more potential than that, so it could grow with time, something Mahito himself straight up says about Junpei's technique, about how his Shikigami will grow with him. So we're going to make a lot of assumption work, but the safest assumption I think we can make is making the Shikigami itself eventually get more curse energy, getting bigger, giving it more tentacles while making it mainly work to defend and attack with Junpei. Also, I would recommend for Junpei to try and create more Shikigami like Moondregs, but that being much smaller Shikigami to overwhelm people and make it so even one of the poisons can land. After all, most people can't heal poisons, and the more options and chances you have to poison someone, the more and more useful it would be. Power doesn't really matter too much, mainly because if they can just manage to land one bit of poison on you, well, it's going to be good for you, but the more poison, the better. Finally, if I was Junpei, I would try and figure out a way to apply the poisonous trait to himself as well, whether it's through him just figuring out how he made it with the Shikigami and figuring out how to turn into a curse technique, or literally figuring out how to make Moondrag his armor and how to help him in hand-to-hand combat. However, I don't really want to enter too much into the realm of fanfiction, mainly because we don't know that much about how Junpei's technique actually works, so I have to make a bunch of assumptions for it. Ultimately though, I do see Junpei being somewhere around the semi-grade 1 to grade 1 levels at his full potential, assuming everything goes absolutely well for him and that he's capable of landing a Black Flash. If not, I think he'd be stuck between semi-grade 1 and grade 2 levels. Now, the next sorcerer we're going to go with is Kirara Hoshi, who Kirara has a very good curse technique, where it effectively forces anyone that they have marked to have to move in a certain pattern in order to actually reach them. And if they don't move in a required order, then other people that have the same star marked onto them will end up getting hit by objects with those stars. Now, Kirara is pretty good of a sorcerer when it comes to fighting against most people, mainly because most people aren't going to realize the pattern they need to move in. The main reason why Megumi was able to beat them was because he got lucky to have a star-obsessed sister. However, because of that, I have two ways in mind to improve Kirara's technique. The first way is just changing the objects that they have access to. Have Kirara carry things like knives, daggers, blades, as well as maybe even bombs if possible, but I doubt bombs mainly because they still exist in Japan. So have them start to carry all of that, and when people move out of line, all of those weapons suddenly hit them. The second thing I have in mind in order to improve Kirara's technique is pretty simple. Give Kirara more constellation signs that they can move in. Now, I'm not entirely sure if this is possible for Kirara to do, however, if it is possible, then this would end up helping them tremendously. There's also something else that I have in mind, which is the reversal of this technique and making Kirara use the technique on themselves. This would be done in order to give them a speed boost so they can move to objects they've marked much faster. So yeah, considering Kirara should be around the semi-grade 1 to grade 1 level already in canon, considering they are capable of fighting against Megumi in my opinion, I think they should be a capable grade 1 in this at their full potential. However, up next we're going to move on to the big 5 students, those being Nobara, Yuji, Megumi, Yuta, and Hakari, and we're going to start out with Nobara. Now, I feel there are a lot of ways to amp up Nobara's curse technique and really make her an absolute powerhouse in the verse. However, I do want to go over a couple things that are rather important to know about Nobara's technique before we even get into amping it. Number 1, Resonance has no power limiter to it. What I mean by that is, if Nobara uses Resonance on an opponent, it doesn't matter how much stronger the opponent's soul is than Nobara, it is going to hit and do really good damage to them. The main reason we know that is for a couple of reasons. Number 1, Resonance did really good damage to Mahito, despite the fact that Nobara considered Nanami to be on a completely different level from her, and then Yuji is much stronger than Nanami, and Mahito is stronger than that Yuji. However, even more importantly, Nobara was able to use it on Sukuna. Sure, yes, it was a massively output nerf Sukuna, but that massively output nerf Sukuna is able to fight against a much stronger Yuji than the one that had fought in the past. Because JJK characters don't just get power-ups from being close to death unless they very specifically force themselves to, like Mahito did. It also should be noted there isn't really implied to be a bare minimum size of what Nobara can use Resonance on, considering the smallest thing we see Nobara use Resonance through is a finger. However, we are going to return to the resonance point later because that will be relevant in a little bit. First, I'm going to talk about Hairpin and how Nobara uses her nails. Nobara uses Hairpin in a total of 2 main ways. The first way that she uses Hairpin as is a bunch of nails she launches out as a projectile, and the second way she uses it is putting it on the ground and preparing it as a trap in order to activate Hairpin. Now up first, one of the main things that I think I would have Nobara do is actually start to focus curse energy into the nails ahead of time rather than having to do it actively in the battle. This allows 2 separate things. Number 1, it allows her to not have to expend anywhere near as much curse energy for Hairpin in advance, mainly because she would have expended that curse energy days ago, and it would allow her to, if needed, add even more curse energy, basically doubling the power potentially. This would also make the potential of Hairpin to be much more explosive because of how much more power it could have. This would also result in Nobara getting curse energy training because she would constantly be pumping her curse energy into those nails, and as a result of that she would need to generate curse energy faster. Furthermore, Nobara could also take inspiration from Yuji's Divergent Fist and make it so in exchange for her hairpin doing half the damage, since the hairpin's going to have double the amount of curse energy infused into it, the second burst of hairpin is going to hit later into the fight after the first one does. They can even do this by making more and more powerful nails that vary on amounts of power that they have access to, allowing them to trick opponents and make different opponents get caught off guard by what Nobara is and is not about to do. Something else that you could add to Nobara and her arsenal is a Shikigami that just exists to store a bunch of nails and scatter them throughout the field in order to set better hairpin traps. Meanwhile, while Nobara is being the main distraction, this Shikigami is just setting up a bunch of these nails so Nobara can direct them to them and bam, all of the hairpins activate. There's also something else that I wanted to add to Nobara's arsenal, which is a literal nail gun. I do want to keep the hammer with the nails that she can fire out directly, but I also think a nail gun would allow Nobara to have a lot more faster of a firing rate for her nails, and imagine her just rapid firing a bunch of nails with curse energy infused into them for her to activate hairpin and spam it. Now, of course, this would take days to prepare for Nobara, but it would still be very helpful for her. I'd also recommend giving Nobara just straight up a bigger hammer as well, or like a bigger hammer to be able to use as a weapon while keeping the smaller hammer around for projectiles and using the bigger hammer for direct melee. And if you think Nobara wouldn't be able to lift this, I just want to remind you guys, Megumi through amping himself up with curse energy could lift several tons inside of a domain in several trucks. If Megumi can do that, then Nobara should be able to lift a bigger hammer. Speaking of, the main purpose of these nails wouldn't even actually be going for lethal spots on the opponent's body, but rather smaller spots on the body. Effectively, the goal with Nobara's technique would be to overwhelm somebody with so many attacks that at least some of their DNA would be able to land on one of the nails, so Nobara could bring it back to herself and activate Resonance in order to forcefully do damage to their soul and stun them for a bit, so she can land the final blow on them. This would be a rather potent combo, especially considering Nobara has proven the ability to use the Black Flash, so if she can rapid fire attacks, that just means more and more chances to even use the Black Flash to begin with. Now, I could see this Nobara easily entering into the high tier grade 1 sorcerer levels. I don't think she would surpass grade 1 level, but I think she would be pretty deep in there. Like, I could see her being on par with Culling Games level Yuji with this resonance that would be very, very effective against literally every sorcerer. However, Nobara's real power would ultimately come in her being a support to her friends in comparison to her being a main person fighter. But still, even with that in mind, Nobara being able to achieve the level of grade 1 and a high-end grade 1 at that is still rather impressive, at least in my mind. And now, after Nobara, we're going to move on to Megumi. Now, the reason the Megumi section is going to be short is not because I don't have ideas for Megumi, but because I've made 3 videos going over Megumi's full potential, as well as a YouTube short talking about Megumi's full potential, so instead I'm just going to summarize basically everything I said in those videos and add on a few more ideas I got both from the comments as well as just new ideas I thought of in general. However, if you want to hear a full in-depth explanation on it, go check out those videos in the full potential playlist. However, the abilities that I have in mind go as followed. Using Well's Unknown Abyss to have several frogs in the shadow to pull people into the shadow and drown them. Making several Shikigami combos through Well's Unknown's Abyss, such as Nue and Rabbit Escape, in order to make lightning missile rabbits, Madoka Deer and Rabbit Escape to make flying healers. Also add Nue to that because I forgot to mention Nue even though I said flying healer, so anyways, continuing on. Rabbit Escape and Piercing Ox to make hundreds of Piercing Ox that are all running at your opponent and gaining more and more power. As you can tell, I think Rabbit Escape is broken when used in combination with other Shikigami. Sealing Madoka Deer itself inside of Megumi's shadow while giving it the ability to leak the positive curse energy out through the shadow, both giving Megumi the ability to heal, while also making it sure if he wants to get full heal he has to go inside of the shadow, and as a result of that he can get the full benefits of healing, while also having it be to an even higher degree. Limiting the amount of Shikigami Megumi can use in his domain as a sure hit, mainly because not all of them are really going to be useful inside of a domain. For example, I don't really see Rabbit Escape being that useful inside of a domain itself, because they're not really combat-based Shikigami and they wouldn't be useful as a sure hit. Same with other Shikigami like Piercing Ox, because Piercing Ox requires time to move, and Sure Hit does the exact opposite because it makes the attacks instantly appear on them. Same with things like Madoka Deer, that type of good jazz. So basically, mainly the attack type Shikigami, like Nue, like Maharaga, those types of Shikigami should be the ones that are in the Sure Hit. The next thing I do is add a Binding Vow in order to amp the time it takes for a totality to naturally form, such as Divine Dog. The main reason why I believe this is possible is because we know it takes time for it to form, and if you add more time, it just puts the user at more and more risk, so I think this should be possible in order to amp the Shikigami up. Up next is trying to add 10 shadows itself and the shadow-like property to a cursed tool like a blade. This could theoretically make a blade that would let Megumi teleport whatever he cuts into his shadow, making a durability negating blade because it just automatically goes inside of his shadow. And then of course the final power-up that we have in mind for Megumi is to combine all of the Shikigami abilities through one massive almighty totality, which is something that everybody has speculated about, but an almighty totality through Maharaga and all the other Shikigami combined would have the healing field from Madoka Deer, Maharaga's adaptation, lightning creation, water creation, piercing Ox's ability, flight, and most of all, the ability to clone itself. And not just like one clone, making millions of clones. So imagine having to fight millions of these things at the same time. One Maharaga is already hard enough to deal with. Now imagine millions of the 10 Shadow Shikigami combined into one that you have to fight all at once. However, now that we got all of the ideas from previous videos established, let's get into even more crazy ways to make Megumi more powerful. Number 1, Megumi's Maharaga should have access to the world-cutting slash, so apply that to the totality we just talked about, and yeah, I feel bad for whoever has to fight against Megumi. Another idea that somebody else came up with is combining Nue with Max Elephant, which will allow people to have lightning water beam cannons, because we already know Nue and Max Elephant are used in tandem, so might as well combine them into one Shikigami. Furthermore, an idea that I have in order to expand on that is just making a small version of the Shikigami, making water manipulation with sparks coming off of it. This was of inspiration from what Sukuna did in his battle against Gojo when he used water like a piercing blood, making what I call piercing aqua. Which that is something that Megumi should be able to do, and he should be able to add lightning to it too from Nue, making it some nice combination between lightning and water. Furthermore, they also came up with the idea of combining Piercing Ox with Nue as well as with Max Elephant, mainly because a flying Piercing Ox is a basically ballistic missile, so imagine how deadly Piercing Ox is with the ability to fly, and then using Max Elephant, which is insanely deadly considering Max Elephant already weighs enough, but the more and more it drops, the more and more power it would gain. Finally, Megumi would also have the potential ability of being capable of using Shrine. However, I do want to wait till we cover Yuji in order to actually talk about Megumi's usage of Shrine, mainly because all the usages of Shrine that Yuji could get, Megumi should be able to get. Some of them would take a bit more time, but they should both be able to get those same usages of Shrine. Finally, the final application I have in mind for 10 shadows to make it as powerful as possible is to apply the shadow effect that we talked about for a cursed tool on something like a shield rather than a sword. The main purpose of this would be to teleport techniques into Megumi's shadow, so Megumi could launch techniques out of his shadow and not take damage from them. Now this does have risks, mainly because we sealed Madoka Deer inside of Megumi's shadow, but we can always just deactivate the technique or reactivate it, so that won't be as much of a risk as people think. And this is only talking about ways to improve Megumi's curse technique. It should also be remembered, Megumi's curse energy experience is going to get a massive buff because Sukuna had actively been in charge of his body and control of his body for a total of a month. We know what that buff did for Yuji when Sukuna had at most been in control of his body for a couple of hours. Furthermore, Sukuna has also landed several black flashes inside of Megumi's body as well, and all that experience should be memorized by Megumi's body. Megumi should also be able to use RCT and also should know how to make an open barrier domain, considering Sukuna not just used it one time, but has used an open barrier domain a total of 6 times. Now yes, I know Megumi is not good with barrier techniques, but at the same time, the body is going to remember this experience, so that's not really going to be an issue for Megumi, at least in my opinion. Furthermore, he's also going to get a bunch of curse energy residue as well from Sukuna being in charge of his body for that long. Now, I do think for obvious reasons, this Megumi ends up surpassing Gojo. If you're going to question why, just a reminder, this is a Megumi that has a Maharaga that can clone itself, that has access to the world-cutting slash. So yeah, I think it's pretty obvious as to why he surpasses Gojo. Now, if we assume that Megumi has the potential access to Shrine, I think we can say without a doubt that Megumi is going to be stronger than Sukuna. If he doesn't have access to Shrine, I think it's a closer fight, but I still would end up giving it to this Megumi over Sukuna. I think this Megumi would classify as special grade for obvious reasons, whether it's for the world cutting slash or having hundreds of creatures that the more and more they run, the more and more power they gain. There is no country I can see on the planet standing a chance against Megumi. However, there is one specific point I kind of want to hone in for Megumi, which is the fact we don't really know everything about his curse technique yet, even though this is how far I'm going. Now, some of you guys might be wondering, what do I mean by that? And I mean very specifically Megumi's domain expansion. Megumi's domain expansion began to have a skeleton spine form in the center of it. Now, I don't actually know how to pronounce it, so I'm just going to put it on screen for you guys to read, because this is something that's actually existing in Japanese mythology, but that was starting to form inside of his domain. There's also the potential of adding a reversal to Megumi as well, which just does apply to other characters as well, but the main one I think this can potentially apply to is Megumi because of how much versatility that Ten Shadows already has, and then reversing the curse techniques. I don't really know what that would equal to, but I think it's still possible and worth mentioning nonetheless. And now we're going to move on to Yuji and the full potential of Yuji Itadori. Now up first, we're already starting out at a pretty good point for Yuji, mainly because of one of Urame's own statements, where they said, does Yuji have potential that can match Sukuna-sama? Which is very heavily implications that Yuji is the same level of potential as Sukuna. So does that mean that full potential Yuji is just equal to Sukuna? In my opinion, no. I think you can generally take Shrine a lot farther than even Sukuna took it, which also funnily enough matches Sukuna's mindset and how he is as a sorcerer. He doesn't think he mastered Shrine, he still is trying to improve it even further. That's the purpose of getting the world-cutting slash to begin with. Sukuna doesn't think he has reached the utmost level of his potential. He never calls himself the strongest or anything like that. He is not content with where he is in strength. All of this is just to say I believe Yuji does have room to grow even further beyond Sukuna. Furthermore, Yuji also has access to even more modern knowledge and other abilities too, such as blood manipulation and just his insane level of physical ability and skills. Now, one of the first things that I would have Yuji do is watch a bunch of martial arts movies. Now, you might be wondering, why would we have Yuji do that? Well, it's because of something really interesting that we find out through one of the data books, which is the fact that Yuji didn't actually learn the Manji kick on his own. He learned it because he watched a movie and copied that move. Which is also, funnily enough, some really good foreshadowing to Sukuna's entire ability to copy anything he sees, as long as it's not a cursed technique, as stated by Hana. So if we make Yuji watch a bunch of martial arts movie, he might be able to become just a full-on martial arts master in like a year at most, which is absolutely crazy that Yuji can become one of the biggest hand-to-hand masters with his already immense physical strength in basically under a year if we have him sit down and watch a bunch of movies, while he can still do all the other type of training that we're going to talk about in this video. Now up first are applications of blood manipulation. Funnily enough, I'm not actually going to give Yuji all the applications of blood manipulation I thought of, mainly because I do believe Shrine has better version of range attacks in comparison to blood manipulation. However, blood manipulation still would have some useful ones, considering Yuji's blood should be poisonous. The reason why I say Yuji's blood should be poisonous specifically against sorcerers is because he does have the body of a death painting. It should be remembered Sukuna is immune to poison, so that is why his blood manipulation hasn't affected anyone yet, but it might actually be poisonous and might be useful against other sorcerers. For Yuji, I would recommend having his blood manipulation very specifically be focused on his hand-to-hand capabilities. So this means learning things like Flowing Red Scale Stack, as well as Blood Meteorite, as those are mainly primarily hand-to-hand based capabilities and could help with things like Yuji's defenses as well as Yuji's basic offenses. Furthermore, as I talked about in the blood manipulation full potential video, another idea that we can have in order to amp up Yuji's blood manipulation is to allow him to amp up his heat even more than Flowing Red Scale Stack already does, which would amp up his ability to do damage even further. However, there's something that Yuji can do that might be even better, and I don't really think most blood manipulation users could actually pull this off, but the reason why I think Yuji could pull it off is because of how much of a master he is with timing, very specifically with the Black Flash as well as Divergent Fist. This is a technique that I got inspiration from One Punch Man, being the Exploding Heart Release Fist. The main reason why I think it works for Yuji is because of how it functions, where the way that it functions is by making the heartbeat beat rapidly alongside the moment that somebody punches in order to make their power much more explosive. Now, if that sounds familiar, it should be, because it's very similar to how the Black Flash functions, where the Black Flash functions by you applying your curse energy at the absolute last second within a millionth of a second. Now, I could see this having very high levels of risk, but at the same time, Yuji is one of the few people who I can see being capable of this, mainly because he already has a non-standard body, he's good with the Black Flash, which is what would the timing require, and he's also kind of the person who is willing to give his body away to do something like this, because man is insane like that. So this would amp up the explosive power he already has massively as a blood manipulation extension technique. Furthermore, this is also something Yuji could just practice while doing normal hand-to-hand combat anyways, because it would just be amping up his normal hand-to-hand capabilities. Also, if Yuji does end up damaging his heart, he does have RCT which he can use on his heart, so he is going to be fine. Up next, if you guys watch my series on what if Yuji awoke Shrine early, you're going to recognize this next application that I'm about to give Yuji, but for people who haven't, I would recommend checking out that series. The next application I have in mind for Yuji's Shrine is to apply it to his fists. Basically, an application that came up with Yuji dismantles is him surrounding his entire fist in those slashes, similar to what Sukuna does in order to catch Maki's blade, however applying that to his hand-to-hand style in general. This would allow Yuji to effectively do double the amount of damage, where he can land both punches on people while immediately slashing at them. Currently, Yuji has the problem of needing to slash people and then land punches on them, however this would allow him to do both at the same time while also fitting heavily with his style. Something else that I could see Yuji doing is also a mixture between the two curse techniques. Now, based on everything we know, it is impossible to have two curse techniques active at a time. However, something I could see Yuji pulling off is using Dismantle to launch himself, and then using Blood Manipulation to amp his speed midair, and then swapping back to Dismantle in order to make a powerful attack while using the built-up speed and momentum from both the other attacks, basically comboing it together by using them in very quick succession. This also fits very well with Yuji's curse energy property that he has access to, which is the Divergent Fist. And as much as the Divergent Fist was something born from a poor control of curse energy, it is still a rather useful tactic, especially because based on what we can tell, no one can actually detect the Divergent Fist. Mahito hasn't done it, Sukuna hasn't done it, nobody has ever detected the Divergent Fist. The only one who might be able to detect it is Gojo with his 6 eyes, and even then that is a maybe. However, that lag in curse energy might become even more broken if Yuji finds a potential way to actually control that lag and utilize it on curse techniques, especially with Shrine. For example, this could allow Yuji to set potential traps where he lands a punch on somebody and they think that Yuji hadn't landed on a dismantle, but with enough time, eventually one will trigger to allow Yuji to smack someone into a black flash. Kind of similar to the tactic that Gojo did with the red in order to launch Sukuna away by faking Sukuna out by making him think the red had activated already. Of course, it wouldn't function anywhere near the same, but it would still have the similar type of effect of being able to catch people off guard to allow Yuji to strike them. However, there is one more thing Yuji has access to that would really amplify his power heavily, and that thing is the world-cutting slash. In my opinion, Yuji should be capable of using it with enough time eventually, both because he had seen Sukuna use it enough times, but also because he would have Megumi around who Megumi would remember the experience because he was awake for it, and could potentially help in explaining it to Yuji. So yeah, you grant Yuji the ability to have a one-shot level slash that can one-shot most people in the first, especially because he would only need to make one hand sign, not 3, because remember, the main reason Sukuna needs to make 3 hand signs in chant is because he needed to make a binding vow so he could do it without any hand signs when he was fighting against Gojo. Furthermore, I could also see Yuji making a hand-to-hand variant specifically, which might actually be able to bypass the hand sign condition because it would be limited to close range and being on Yuji's hands while using it in tandem with the Dismantle Fist I talked about earlier. Of course, I'm not fully sure if that's possible, but at the same time, the world-cutting slash is literally just a dismantle that's targeting existence and the world itself rather than just targeting a person. Plus, we know the world-cutting slash can travel thanks to Maki dodging it, so in my opinion, this should be possible. And it would give a whole new layer of combat to Yuji's hand-to-hand combat, because imagine if he just has world-cutting slashes he can punch with. So while Yuji doesn't have the perfect body for Jujutsu Sorcery like Sukuna does, I do see this Yuji being on par with, if not maybe a little bit stronger than Sukuna. However, I can see this Yuji actually being able to beat Sukuna relatively easily, mainly because this Yuji would be a perfect counter to Sukuna with his entire soul abilities. However, I can see Yuji being on par, if not a bit stronger than Sukuna. Oh, there's one more part that I think is very important to add. I think Yuji is one of the 2 sorcerers that I think could possibly end up awakening an open barrier domain, because Sukuna had already used it twice in his body. Now, I don't think it would be as easy for someone like Megumi, because Megumi had felt Sukuna use an open barrier domain 5 to 6 times in his body, but I think it would be possible for Yuji, even though he's only felt it 2 times. But yeah, that's the final part for Yuji and where I think Yuji's full potential lies. An immense amount of physical power possible to him, the full avenues of blood manipulation as well as shrine possible to him, and finally the world-cutting slash and the divergent fist, and a master of martial arts with great RCT, as well as simple domain, and finally an open barrier domain as well. So I think this is easily special grade, and around the same level of Sukuna, a bit stronger than him in my opinion. I would have loved to give Yuji some power-ups based around the soul, but we don't know enough about the soul to give Yuji power-ups based on that, but if Yuji did have any powers based around the soul that could end up powering him up, that's not just mainly focused around vessels, then that would be added too. But I'm going to leave that for you guys to think about in the comment section down below on ways to power up Yuji based on soul power-ups, if you have any ideas that you can justify. Now up next is Hakari. How do I advance Hakari? Well, in my opinion, Hakari's curse technique itself is already a really good curse technique. A domain expansion that's naturally good at clashing and having the ability to give Hakari infinite amount of curse energy for 4 minutes and 11 seconds, making him completely immortal. I think that's a really good curse technique. However, I think there's more Hakari can do with the infinite amount of curse energy he has itself. Now, Hakari does have the doors as well as the balls, but we don't really know how good they are in combat itself, considering Hakari never uses it on anyone other than Yuji that we have seen so far, so I can't really say much about those. And I have 2 ways on how to actually improve Hakari's curse technique. And one of the simple ways is curse energy discharge, which is basically have Hakari learn how to fire out his curse energy like projectiles. That'll immediately give him range as well as the ability to fire attacks on more people. And the best part is for Hakari, he wouldn't really have a size limit or an amount limit that he could fire out, because he has infinite energy while he's in Jackpot. So he could just spam out these massive curse energy balls at people, or minor ones that are acting more like machine gun rapid fire, all towards an opponent, and overwhelm them with massive amount of firepower, all while never getting tired himself. And then finally, there's the real way to make Hakari even more broken and even more powerful, which is something that I want to add to his domain expansion especially. Where basically the idea I have in mind is that Hakari has access to several tools that have varying levels of curse energy output that they are able to output of the infinite amount of curse energy that Jackpot has access to, with of course the number 777 having by far and away the strongest weapon. This way we can stick onto the entire luck theme that exists with Hakari. This was inspired by a character from Hunter x Hunter known as Kite, mainly because I think that's something really cool to apply to Hakari. However, that's at least my opinion on the biggest things you can really do for Hakari's curse technique, like give him different weapons that are linked to the domain, and whatever number he lands ends up resulting in him getting a different weapon to fight alongside him during the battle against whoever he's up against. Maybe give him Shikigami as well, so it's not just him alone, but also other things that also wield an infinite amount of CE with limited output similar to himself. That way Hakari can make basically any fight a jumping. Now, I know there are some belief that Hakari does have access to luck manipulation, but in my opinion, I don't think there is enough that exists in JJK to prove that for me to say that for certainty, similar to the soul stuff for Yuji's powers. While I think this Hakari is a bit stronger than his canon counterpart, I don't think it's going to be too much stronger than his canon counterpart. However, maybe I'm just not looking deep enough into Hakari, and this is just the initial things that I can come up with off the top of my head. Now up next is the Yuta section, which I'm going to make this section rather small. Now some of you guys might be wondering, why would I make this small? And that's mainly because of one main reason. In my opinion, I don't think there's much to talk about for how to improve Yuta, other than give Yuta this curse technique here, give Yuta this curse technique. I think that would just get really boring for me to talk about, so instead I want to talk about Yuta's mechanics for copying themselves and how to make them better, such as the timer he has, which only lasts for 5 minutes, outside of the domain of course, as well as his ability to use Rika. Those are the things I want to target, mainly because if we can alter the base of Yuta and make him have a stronger base, it would end up helping everything else about Yuta much better. Also because there are tons of videos that have already existed on giving Yuta a list of cursings that he should copy, so I'm not going to repeat that. Instead, what I want to do is give Yuta 2 separate modes of using his curse technique rather than his main version that he uses. Now, Yuta's main flaw of his curse technique is the fact that he can only use it for 5 minutes. Furthermore, in order to gain access to someone's technique, he needs to eat a part of the person's body. If the part is not big enough, then Yuta has to make a binding vow to limit the amount of uses he has of the technique. Furthermore, he doesn't have automatic mastery of any technique, but that's not really something we can fix. And finally, if the part is healed, then the copy is made null and void. The main part that I want to focus on is the 5-minute timer part, as the other 2 have rather easy solutions, which is just Yuta killing his opponent, but at the same time, that means Yuta has to mainly use copy on enemies because I don't see him killing any of his friends. The 2 modes that I have access to for Yuta are linked to him putting the finger on different rings. Why did I say the finger on different rings? The 2 modes that I have in mind for Yuta is him putting rings on separate fingers, where each of the fingers have a binding vow linked to it, where one of the fingers would specifically be to increase the timer heavily, where in turn Yuta would have to use double the amount of curse energy for each of the techniques, but giving him access to all the curse techniques for 10 minutes rather than 5 minutes. And you would think this would be a problem normally until you remember the fact that Rika gives Yuta infinite amount of curse energy, so it would just be more draining for him to use, but at the same time Rika would replenish that curse energy pretty fast unless Rika ends up getting destroyed. This ends up fixing one of Yuta's major problems that he has, where he's only able to fight with 5 minutes while the copy techniques, but now he has much longer battle duration, with him having 10 minutes. And if you don't think that would work either, then you could specifically make it so in this mode for 10 minutes, Yuta is limited to only 4 curse techniques, rather than all the curse techniques he could access and hot swap between. Well, yes, he can only use 1 at a time. In this specific mode, he could only use 4 that he would select before putting on the ring itself, as a binding vow in order to extend the time. And the other mode that I have in mind for Yuta is what I would basically consider to be a 1 minute last resort type mode, where Yuta only has access to all the curse techniques for a total of 1 minute, but in exchange for that, the output would be amped massively. Like, I could see this end up amping all the output of the techniques that he has copied by 500% in exchange for the fact that he has limited it to be a fifth of the time. And this would give him a large amount of power that could be used if he wants to do like a final move. And he could probably just hot swap between the rings, where he immediately goes with a 10-minute ring and then goes to the 1-minute ring at the last moment for a final finishing blow. Basically, if he needs power, he would go with the 1 minute mode. If he needs a drawn out battle, he'd go with the 10-minute mode. And if he needs something in between, he'd go with his normal ring finger. And this would especially go well in the domain as well, because I could see Yuta being able to activate the 1 minute mode inside of the domain for a final move in order to finish something off, while using the domain to make sure he doesn't need to worry about a timer until the 1 minute mode comes up in that massively amped state. Now, I do think Yuta does have the potential to eventually reach Gojo's level, so I'm just going to say Yuta at his full potential should be around the level of Gojo, with him in the 1 minute mode probably being much stronger than him. And now finally onto the teamwork section, and unfortunately there isn't really much that they can really do for the teamwork section. Now, I do want to note this and how the teamwork section works. It is more so me specifically talking about how they can use each other's abilities to improve each other as fighters, rather than them having team tactics. If I were to list off their team tactics, I would be here all day, and that's not really what this video was for. If you guys do want to see me come up with team tactics for JJK duos to use, then tell me that in the comment section down below. But this is more so made for how individual characters can effectively help each other get stronger. For example, something we gave in the Kyoto video is Mekamaru just creating weapons for all the students. And the only thing I can see them doing is, like, maybe Yuji has the capability of turning his dry blood into tools which he can give to everybody else, like Maki for extra armor. If we give the assumption that the gauntlets Yuji has made is made out of his dry blood from blood manipulation and not just some random curse tool. Other than that, there isn't really much they can actually do in teamwork, unfortunately. However, I do find it kind of funny that Kyoto High just has much more teamwork potential than Tokyo High does. Hi, I'm Future Eternal Flame here, and now originally this video was just going to be the combination of these two videos, but I remember that I got a lot of comment suggestions, and I want to take this time now to talk about all the comment suggestions I got from both of these videos that I really liked. I can't really cover them all because there are a lot, but I do want to spend some time covering them because you guys came up with some really good ideas. We're going to start out with the first idea. They're not really going to be in order of specific characters, it's just going to be for fun, which the first idea is going to be for Toto, which is just having Toto carry around bombs and have him swap with people right before the bombs explode. Which, yeah, that is a pretty useful idea. Just to advance that idea even more, give Toto a Shikigami that exists just to carry around the bombs and use that in order to swap places, so the Shikigami is swapped, and also just allows Toto to carry around extra stuff with the bombs just in the background. Speaking of, with the same energy of Toto, give Toto the ability to swap with Pocket Sand. Just give Toto a bunch of Pocket Sand, and you're never touching him in battle again. Remember, you can infuse curse energy into objects, so just give Toto a bunch of Pocket Sand, and either A, you can teleport yourself into the Pocket Sand, you can swap with an infinite amount of Pocket Sand. Remember how, like, what he was doing with Yuta's entire domain shards? He can just do that with the Pocket Sand. Or B, he can teleport someone into the Pocket Sand and blind someone. Man, Pocket Sand is deadly in the hands of Toto. Who knew all you needed to do in order to make Toto overpowered was give him Pocket Sand? Up next is an idea for Junpei, which is basically making the poison much more focused, mainly because poison is extremely deadly already, and Junpei, despite the fact that he had just awoken sorcery, could already use poison. So if Junpei was just going to get better and better, and could learn how to focus the poison better, then oh boy, he would be a real massive threat, because a lot of people can't really heal off poisons. Speaking of course, in a similar vein, give Junpei a similar technique to how Sukuna used piercing blood with water, and instead making it his poison. So basically give Junpei access to piercing poison, or like a piercing blood poison-like variant, which is just basically Choso's piercing blood, because Choso's blood is poisonous to most people too, but now Junpei can fire that out, and like that seemed possible for Junpei to do. It would just take a lot of training and probably some time spent with Choso in order to figure it out, but I think it's possible. It's the Full Potential series. We're bringing these characters to their utmost limits. Why not? Now up next is an idea for Nobara and how to advance her curse technique, mainly because of how her nails function. Mainly because her nails function as a way for her to manipulate her curse energy from a range, so it should fully be possible for her to use RCT through the nails, which would both be very useful as a support technique against her own comrades, while at the same time being very useful against opponents as well, especially if they're cursed spirits. Think about it like this: Nobara could immediately just make a nail fly an opponent and then activate reverse curse technique inside of them. It would either result in healing the opponent and also likely ejecting the nail and healing the damage that had been caused, while also potentially ending up just killing any cursed spirit as well. With Nobara having enough time, she probably could achieve that, though that would take a lot of time for her to train and achieve. Furthermore, as the original comment did go out of their way to justify it, that Nobara does have a chance at being able to do this, mainly because Nobara's technique inherently allows her to remotely output energy from her body via the nails as a vestige, so it should be capable of doing this with RCT with enough practice and training. Up next is an idea for Hakari on how to make him a really good support character that also seems to be really in character for Hakari, which is basically making it so that anyone who bets against Hakari getting a jackpot will be able to get a jackpot in their domain, probably limiting it to only basically allies within it through a binding vow, and that would basically allow all the allies who bet against Hakari getting a jackpot to get their own jackpot, and they can just substitute in while Hakari's on the sidelines waiting until he gets to activate his domain again and hopefully gets a jackpot, or just has to wait until he doesn't get a jackpot again. This will just give him a lot more support versatility. Either in that same vein, this is an idea that I just came up with, you could end up basically just making it so certain numbers are allocated to giving other people jackpot alongside Hakari. So some of the numbers will just give Hakari jackpot, and some numbers will give other people alongside Hakari jackpot, making it that much more rare for it to actually happen. And that would just also be very in line and in character for Hakari to have that with his type of domain expansion. Up next, we're going to go back to Toto, which is an idea on Toto inheriting Garuda, and this was something that literally everybody fought, me included. Like, a bunch of people I first thought the Vibra Slap was just going to be Toto using Garuda, but no, it wasn't. But Toto with Garuda is kind of crazy, because imagine Star Rage with basically a sure hit, mainly because, keep in mind, Toto is effectively a sure hit because it's near impossible to dodge his attacks because he can teleport you into them. So yeah, Toto with Garuda is kind of a crazy combo. It also would be really narratively fitting as well, with Toto carrying on Yuki's will, carrying on Yuki's studies, using what Yuki had given him in the past being Garuda in order to continue on her will. Now up next we have a pretty massive idea on how to upgrade Hakari fully, but I'm going to go over this entire idea, and this is a rather fun idea too. Now, I do also mention stat amps as well as Hakari using binding vows, but, well, I don't want to go over that because that's pretty obvious, so we're going to go into the real meat of the idea, which is basically giving his domain different results depending on the number it lands on, and depending on the combination it lands on. This basically adds a whole new level of versatility to Hakari, making it so every single jackpot has an unpredictable result. Also, it could make it so like Hakari can overwhelm someone with so much more information, because now they also have to keep in mind all of the different variations of jackpot that exist, from 111 all the way to 777. Where their ideas for each of them are, in 111, he copies basically Confiscation for 4 minutes and 11 seconds, where he gets his CE refilled by a burst of unlimited CE and healing himself back. However, the unlimited CE he has is taken away, but in exchange for that, the opponent ends up losing their own CE and CT as well. Now, I think it's more likely that it will be that the opponent loses just their CT, mainly because Hakari himself maintains his CE, but at the same time, this is still a pretty cool way for 111 to be used. Up next is the 222 jackpot, which is more so based around the kite idea that I discussed in the video itself, where he ends up getting a weapon from a Shikigami, but it's also based on his fever itself, and if Hakari's on his game, he gets a really good weapon, but if he's off his game, he will end up getting a much weaker weapon. Up next is the free effect, where instead of himself getting jackpot, he ends up summoning a Shikigami, which is basically a giant train, being the Private Pure Love train, that gets that infinite CE for one massive attack, basically being his sure hit type of attack. Up next is 444, which is also similar to the kite idea, however it has a new variation added on top of that, where every 30 seconds the Shikigami transforms into a new weapon. Sometimes it could be powerful and sometimes it could not be powerful, it's always just a strong tool for him to use. But the tool that Hakari would have access to is randomized at that current point in time. And then of course there's the 555 jackpot, which would just be a normal jackpot that wouldn't really be that much different from the other jackpots. Then there is the 666 jackpot, which is what they call the Joker draw, where it ends up equalizing the playing field. It both refreshes himself as well as refreshes the opponent, but in return for that he creates a Shikigami clone of himself, with the Shikigami clone having half the stats as Hakari, and Hakari is able to share senses with that clone. However, one of the rules are that the clones don't fade until they run out of curse energy themselves, but they also don't get refreshed by the domain. However, Hakari ends up getting several of these 666 jackpots back to back. He would end up getting a bunch of these clones that are similar in stats, and someone enough to fight 21 Hakaris that all have access to the same door and ball abilities that Hakari has access to. And then finally, there is the 777 jackpot, which is by far and away his most powerful move, that both requires him to be on a roll and hit a black flash. However, on top of this, his brain specifically won't be refreshed, so if this is landed, there is no looping. This is the final move and the final jackpot. In return for this though, Hakari has everything before this and no drawbacks. He has access to all of the abilities that we have talked about, no wonky C manipulation, and no output drops in any of his stats. He gets everything, and on top of that, RCT output for a very large radius that he has control of, meaning any allies fighting alongside him will be healed at half or less than half of the efficiency of Hakari. Keep in mind as well, Hakari has the best RCT in the verse, so that's insane. Like, being half the speed of Hakari's healing is very good for you, so yeah, this is going to be a very, very potent ability. And while we are done with that Hakari idea, we're not done with Hakari yet, mainly because someone else came up with a really good Hakari idea on how to advance his abilities, which makes a lot of sense in my opinion, which is basically something to do with Jackpot, where it can be a binding vow that Hakari makes, where if he chooses to try and guess what the numbers for Jackpot will be, he can end up getting a massive buff towards Jackpot. However, if he ends up getting it wrong, it will end up collapsing the domain entirely. And with Hakari's lucky self, I can definitely see him being able to pull this off and this actually being very successful for him. Now up next is an idea for Mechamaru, but this is more so a funny idea if anything, which is just the idea that Mechamaru should have made a jet instead of a giant mecha, mainly because if he was going to fly a jet out, he would have been able to escape all of them pretty easy. He would have been able to escape Mahito and Kenjaku pretty easy, especially considering it be a curse energy amp jet, rather than actually fighting him. Why did you fight Kenjaku and Mahito? You're not him, Mechamaru. Like, I still don't get why Mechamaru fought them to this day. However, Mechamaru is dead, no need to talk about him anymore, but we're going to move on to their other idea for Mai Zenin and how to improve her. Which their idea is to take inspiration from single-celled organisms, like the tardigrade, which that is an organism that has immense adaptation capabilities, allowing it to survive in extreme conditions, in order to give herself something like a self-replicating armor as well. Furthermore, you can also use chemical warfare, like curse energy-infused weapon diseases, which, man, Mai is really powerful. Or at least Mai's full potential has a lot of power to it. And now onto the final idea that I'm going to discuss for this section, which is Yuji getting a very similar effect to the soul-splitting katana, mainly because of the fact that he's already capable of targeting the souls, so in theory he should be capable of targeting people's souls and cutting them, similar to how the soul-split katana is able to bypass durability because it directly cuts the soul, which I do think is possible, since it should also be remembered the soul-split katana is originally a curse technique as well, so I think it is fully possible for him to get a soul-split katana-like curse technique. Now, I did get a lot more ideas from the comment sections and just ideas in general for full potential things in the future. However, I want to save those for individual videos for some characters that deserve it, because some characters got a huge focus of ideas, so we're going to save that for the future. But that's about all the comments we're going to go over for this video. Thank you for watching to the very end. I hope you have a good day. Peace.